Hi, welcome back to Space Thoughts. Today we're going to talk about Camden Spaceport, in particular the Supreme Court case that was brought up back in October, basically challenging the vote. Now, that opinion came out on February 7th, and it wasn't good for Camden County Spaceport. Now, I'll discuss that a little bit after we talk about the opinion. Going into the opinion, it's 47 pages, including appendixes and concurrences. So it is, but it's a very interesting read. Now, we will put a link in the description to the opinion if you want to download it and look at it. It's from a lawyer's perspective, it's very, very interesting. If you're not, excuse me, if you're a non-lawyer, it might be a little mind-boggling. I know even for lawyers, it is very deep stuff because it does deal with a constitutional question. In other words, the Georgia Constitution. I'm just going to preface all this saying, we talk about space law in terms of the Outer Space Treaty and all these international accords, but really, space law has become more than that. It's really become it has trickled down, and it's come to the point where federal, state, and municipal laws come into play and really affect space law, as in my opinion, this case did. So space law is really growing in terms of what it's not only it's where it's applied, but how it's applied and the other areas of law that are affected. In this case, a constitutional question that has nothing to do with outer space, but everything to do with facilitating outer space kind of, is affecting space law and space activities, in particular, non-governmental activities. So I'm going to discuss the opinion. I'm going to really discuss it briefly because it is very dense, and they've really get into a lot of detail, and I don't want to go on here forever, and you don't want to listen to me here droning on forever either. So, background: back on March 8th, back in 2021, I believe it was, a group of citizens got together, which were really prompted by environmental NGOs, got together and filed a petition against Camden County Spaceport Authority, which was basically the body that was facilitating this creation of a spaceport in Camden County. And they basically what Camden County did, they entered into an option with Union Carbide to purchase property to actually build this spaceport. In fact, back several years ago, they had this big publicity stunt where I believe it was Vector Rocket at the time. Launch was essentially a big model rocket just to make a big public splash. And this is before the whole licensing process even started. What happened is they Union Carbide, they entered into an option agreement with Union Carbide to purchase the property. And this actually is very key to the license that was issued to Camden County back in 2021, this piece of property, because that's where the whole environmental review is focused on. But basically, the NGOs got together and facilitated a signature petition to the probate judge in Camden County to hold a referendum on March 8th to decide whether or not to repeal the purchase agreement or the purchase option with Union Carbide. In other words, since the Camden County Authority entered into the purchase agreement with Union Carbide as an authoritative act of the body, as they're allowed to under Georgia law. However, the referendum that the probate judge certified basically said that, basically was to actually repeal that. And all this goes back into a nuance of the Georgia Constitution, which this whole Supreme Court appeal revolves around. Long story short, on March 8th, the referendum was held, and it was voted very, very decidedly almost to basically, repeal the purchase agreement with Union Carbide. And that struck off a bunch of other things where Union Carbide said, okay, we're withdrawing the option, and Camden County sued them for a breach of contract, and that's sitting in court right now, federal court right now, actually stayed waiting for the decision of the Georgia Supreme Court on this. Long story short is the Camden County Authority, Spaceport Authority, went to basically filed an appeal against the judge, or what they call a writ of mandamus, basically saying to the judge, look, you got to decertify, you have to decertify this vote. And the judge said, no, I'm not required to do that. So they made this a issue under the Constitution, under what we call home rule, which we'll look at in just a moment, with the Supreme Court basically saying that this vote doesn't, under the home rule provision of the Georgia Constitution, this this referendum does not have the authority to actually repeal a decision by a municipal body or a county body like the Camden County Spaceport Authority. And mind you, the Spaceport Authority is granted authority under an act that was passed by the Georgia legislature. So it went to it. There were arguments on October 8th. I actually listened to the oral arguments, and what I'll do is I'll also link the video to the oral arguments if you want to listen to them. They're extremely, extremely complicated because, again, we're not talking about outer space treaty or anything really directly space related. We're talking about the ancillary manner of whether or not this vote was valid or should have been repealed under the home rule provision of the Georgia State Constitution. So let's get right into it and look at this. This is the home rule paragraph. This is an abridged version. I copied this directly from the opinion itself. This is what the judges looked at. So fundamentally, under Georgia law, municipal bodies like Camden County Spaceport Authority have the ability to enter into agreements like they did with Union Carbide, this option agreement. They have the opportunity, but there's also an opportunity for repeal. And there's two provisions. One, the acts may be amended or repealed by a resolution or ordinance duly adopted at 2 regular consecutive meetings of the county governing authority, not less than 7 nor more than 60 days apart. In other words, there can be, again, the voting body can actually, can actually repeal acts within the time frame set under the home rule paragraph. And now this is taken directly from the Georgia Constitution. This isn't legislative law. This is actually the Georgia Constitution itself. And the other instances, amendments to or repeals of such local acts or ordinances, resolutions or regulations adopted pursuant to subparagraph A hereof may be issued by a petition filed with the judge of the probate court of the county. And you'll notice the ... that means there's a lot more. But this is what the Georgia Supreme Court was really focusing in on, and subparagraph 2 is really where they focus their attention. In other words, basically what the Camden County Spaceport Authority is saying, look, under subparagraph 2, there's nothing in it that specifically says that an official act by the under subparagraph 1 may not be withdrawn by this type of vote. So in other words, this probate judge had no business certifying this vote in the first place. And there are other technicalities that they talked about, but I'm not going to talk about those here. If you want to read the opinion, you can read about those. So the Supreme Court was basically put into a very interesting position because, again, this is interpreting the Georgia Constitution. It's interpreting a legislative act. It's interpreting the Georgia Constitution. And that's a very, very serious matter. So basically, the question is whether or not an act of a local body under the home rule paragraph of the Georgia Constitution can be repealed by a vote, such as a referendum that was held, or a vote that was held, like the one that was held on March 8, 2022. And the answer they came up with is yes. Now, it wasn't immediately says yes, yes, this vote was valid. They went through a very lengthy constitutional argument about this, about how the history of the Georgia Constitution, how the Georgia Constitution has been interpreted, and they basically formulated and came up with the conclusion that even though it doesn't specifically say in the home rule paragraph that a referendum can repeal an act of a local municipality or agent of the municipality like the Camden Spaceport Authority, it is implicitly in there. This is what they basically intended. And this is kind of where we get into this idea of penumbras of constitutional law. In other words, what's in the shadows? In other words, what isn't expressly there, but what's in the shadows? So what the Supreme Court did in this case was they looked in the shadows and they saw that basically, the right for a referendum is in there, and this vote was valid. And the Camden County Spaceport Authority, their assertion that the vote is invalid, or that the probate judge had to repeal it or didn't have the authority to actually certify this vote, was negated. It doesn't exist. It was a false argument. And there are other arguments where the Camden County Spaceport Authority says, well, there's this case called Kemp that focused on another act called municipal, that deals with municipalities, but the Supreme Court basically said no, by the specific wording of this act that you're citing, it doesn't even apply to this. The home rule paragraph rules, we imply within the penumbras of the home rule paragraph in the Georgia Constitution that a vote of the populace of a county that is certified by that can be certified by a probate judge is valid to actually repeal an act of a body like the Camden County Spaceport Authority. So all in all, that was a huge blow to the Camden Spaceport, this ruling. Because it is the Georgia Supreme Court, it's really basically the highest ruling in the state of Georgia on the fact of the Georgia Constitution. Can't really go any farther. So basically they say what the law is, in a sense, and the Camden County Spaceport Authority has lived with it. Well, what does this mean? Well, it means the vote was valid. The probate judge was correct in certifying in allowing the vote to begin with, and certifying it afterwards. And the judge didn't have any rule or obligation to actually decertify the vote afterwards. I talked about that writ of mandamus that the Spaceport Authority was trying to issue against the judge. So basically, in all essence, in my opinion, the Camden Spaceport is dead. It's pretty much dead in the water, because without that property, that specific property, you're not going to get it. Now, what Union Carbide will likely do, they have a pending motion to dismiss right now. They'll unstay the proceedings in federal court, and again ask the judge to rule on their motion to dismiss, which basically says so many words that there was a referendum that basically withdrew the authority of the Camden County Spaceport Authority to authorize to enter into this purchase option with us. So we are correct, legally correct in withdrawing it. We have no legal obligation to actually have specifically perform this option. And that's basically what's going to happen, is the federal judge is going to look what happened in Georgia with the Supreme Court ruling, and he or she's likely going to say case dismissed with prejudice, and that's going to be into the purchase agreement. Now, what happens with that is there is a provision in the actual license issued by the FAA saying basically, okay, we grant you a spaceport license, but you can't enter into any contracts for any launch agreements until you obtain proper property. They don't specifically mention Camden County Spaceport, but since where the environmental review occurred to begin with, that's where it belongs. So they may have the spaceport license, but they really can't do anything with it because they're going to lose they're not going to be able to purchase the property that they need. So that basically means these environmental groups and such that really got on the stick and jumped into this. They in my opinion, they racked up a major victory. Now, there's been puffing in the press by certain officials that this is a setback, but we're going to still push through. In my opinion, there's nowhere to go. I know that there has been a new member of the Camden County Spaceport Authority who was one of the original instigators of the referendum, who's been against this, and he's been filing resolutions within the Spaceport Authority to stop spending money on all these lawsuits. And now with this decision by the Georgia Supreme Court, he's going to have more ammunition to really file these again, and within the body itself. And eventually they're going to say, okay, we can't keep spending money on a lost cause like this. I will note there's also a lawsuit in federal court in DC by one of these environmental NGOs to decertify, to basically take away the spaceport license. I don't know what's going to happen with that. In my opinion, I don't think they have their arguments aren't really legally solid, and they're more puffing than anything else. But with the loss of the license, with the loss of this option of a purchase of the property, the license has nowhere to go. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Again, very, very, very short synopsis of what went on in that decision with the Georgia Supreme Court. Again, I'll set a link in the description so you can actually go in and read it for yourself. And if you're a subscriber to my briefing letter, the Pressy, I will be talking about this and analyzing this more in the litigation section in the first quarter 2023 issue, which comes out on March 24th. If you're not subscribed to the Pressy, I encourage you to become one. www.thepressy.net. Go there. There's a link if you want a complimentary copy to look at it. I will send you a copy of this issue right here, plus a special issue that an example of a special issue that I do. Again, I keep it reasonably priced. I have discounts for government employees, military, academia, faculty, students, and nonprofit organizations. And if you're a member of the media, send me an email, and I will gladly work out a good subscription rate for you as well. So again, this is basically, so all in all, in my opinion, Camden County Spaceport, dead. And bottom line is the NGOs were very, very effective right up front in pursuing and attacking this, right up through the initial environmental assessment, right through to what we had, to initiating the referendum to get rid of the purchase property. They've been attacking it from all angles, and it was aggressive, and it was very, very effective in this case. We'll see how this plays out in the next few months. But again, like I said, I think this is dead. I don't see any way forward for it. I could be wrong. There might be a loophole, but I think overall it's dead. And I think you're going to see another piece of legislation come back in the Georgia legislature that came up during their last session, that was basically going to decertify, eliminate the Camden County Spaceport Authority as a body. Now, what's interesting is Georgia also has a non-governmental space law, which basically limits liability, what have you, the Georgia Space Flight Act, and that was passed several years ago. Question is now that, basically it's very unlikely you're going to have a spaceport or any commercial space activities in Camden County. The question is whether or not the legislature will look at this law and decide whether they need to keep it on the books or repeal it as well. It'll be very interesting to see it. But again, very interesting. Again, the NGOs were very effective, in my opinion, were very effective and instrumental in getting and really killing the spaceport idea. And it's really too bad because, this is, commercial spaceports are very important. It's certainly not like Field of Dreams if you build it in your Comet. And I think one of the issues they had was they didn't have an anchor tenant there as well, which made things a little bit more difficult. There's a lot of things. I think I'll talk about this more in my briefing letter coming out in March. But like I said, I think it's pretty much dead at this point. Again, it's a shame, but this has been a long, drawn out process. And without going into specifics, there are lessons to be learned for other states who are pursuing their own spaceports, that can be learned from this, from the mistakes that I think were made in this. But that's all I have for this video. Again, I'll set the link for both the video of the oral arguments back in October and the actual opinion in the description for this. I hope to do a few more. I know one of the big things right now has been the Chinese balloon incident. I may be doing a video within the next week or two on that to discuss some of my thoughts on that. Maybe we'll see how things play out, because that's still developing. And I do want to have my thoughts kind of straight before I do jump into it. So until then, we are almost to the end of winter here in the Northern Hemisphere. And to my friends in the Southern Hemisphere, fall's coming up pretty soon for you. So again, until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and I will talk to you next time.